Welcome to a new Daily Top AskReddit video. Today's topic:
what is the most obvious sign a couple won't last long? I always find couples who post about how much they love each other on social media break up pretty quick. I'm not talking about like one post but the excessive ones. Recent example being a girl I know who posted probably every other day about how this guy is her world, she'd be lost without him, she misses him when he's not there, etc. They were together about 3 months total. I just find it so obvious. I think these people just have a very specific idea about the relationship they want to have, and so they dump all that shit on the next partner and just play the part until it all collapses. I can imagine if I was the partner it would be exhausting and also pretty embarrassing. I'd only be able to take so much. They casually show signs that they don't respect each other. It can be a lot of eye-rolling, mocking, condescending laugh, casually saying, "You're so stupid," embarrassing in front of friends. The Gottman Institute says the number one emotion that predicts whether couples will split up is contempt. Absolutely, and I think if we look at couples around us we can definitely notice that pattern, that couples where there is contempt are deeply unhappy. Different argument styles. Shows contempt for spouse. Talks shit about each other to friends. Great points. Reminds me of this podcast, This American Life 261, The Sanctity of Marriage. I bolded the parts that leaped out at me. Excerpt. Dr. John Gottman takes couples, wires them up to devices that monitor their breathing and their heartbeats, sits them in front of video cameras, and then asks them to talk about something that they disagree about. John Gottman, from a 15-minute videotape of a couple talking about an area of disagreement, we have an 85% probability of predicting what's going to happen to them in the next 4 years. Ira Glass, you mean if they'll still be together? John Gottman, if they'll still be together or not. And also, if they're together, whether they'll be happy or miserable. Ira Glass, but that's not all. If he spends another hour or so, and asks them to talk about how they met, what kinds of things they share. John Gottman, then it goes up to 94%. And now you can see that there's no positive emotion really going on that's shared. One of them may laugh. The other one doesn't laugh. One of them looks warm and interested. The other one is pulled away. There's just no fun. They don't seem to enjoy each other at all. Those are the couples where, when you go to a restaurant, you see these couples who aren't talking to each other. That's them. They can last a long time being quite unhappy. They can be great parents. But especially when the kids leave home, they're at risk for really falling apart. Gottman says that when they started this research, they had no idea which factors were going to be the ones that would predict divorce. Nobody had ever observed couples so closely and then followed them over time to see who stayed together and who did not. Therapists and pop psychologists had all kinds of theories as to what would make a good relationship. They were all completely untested. They thought that having lower expectations of marriage might make for happy marriages. Turns out to be untrue. They thought that good couples make I statements instead of you statements. Turns out, no. Many people thought, including Gottman and his colleagues, that anger would predict divorce. This idea is actually still around, that anger is destructive to any relationship, that it's against the scriptures, that it should be banned from marriages. In fact, the data shows, happy, stable couples get angry all the time. John Gottman, but their partners heard the anger. They responded to it. So a person might say, in a good relationship, will you shut up and let me finish? Really angry, right? And their partner would say, all right, finish. Angry response. But then the person got to finish. The anger didn't predict anything negative. Now, in a relationship that wasn't working well, will you shut up and let me finish? Oh, I don't get to finish until you finish, is that it? Yeah. Why, that's just like what your mother would say. Oh, now I'm like my mother, now. Yeah, you are. Yadada, yadada, yadada. Quote, contempt, an escalation to defensiveness and contempt. And that's the difference. The anger wasn't predicting anything negative, but the escalation, that was predicting things negative. Ira Glass, one of the most radical findings in the studies is that the studies threw doubt on the idea that couples should split up if they had irreconcilable differences. All couples have irreconcilable differences, the studies proved, the ones that stay together and the ones that don't. Diane Solly, they found that all couples disagree basically the same amount. And then they thought, well, maybe it's about what they disagree about. And they found, no, it's not that. It's not that some fight about money, and some about sex, and some about, they found that all couples basically disagree about the same issues. Ira Glass, which are, Diane Solly, money, kids, sex, others, and time. And others are things like who you're jealous of at the office, or your in-laws. And time is like, what are we going to do on Sunday with our leisure time? And so if all couples disagree about the same amount and about the same issues, well, then, what is it? And they found that it was that some couples understand, they don't go to pieces when they're disagreeing. The success of marriage, they found out, was not based on finding someone with whom you agree on everything and finding your soulmate. It was how you're going to handle the inevitable disagreements that are going to come up, no matter who you marry. Gottman and a researcher named Bob Levinson have also done a 12-year study of homosexual couples. There were just 42 couples, a small study for Gottman, who usually gets 130 couples of races and ages to match the demographics of Seattle. The study looked at 21 lesbian couples and 21 gay male couples, and compared them to 42 straight marriages of the same length of relationship and relationship satisfaction, as measured on a questionnaire. The researchers videotaped the couples talking about some issue that they conflict about. And they found that the homosexual couples were far better than the married heterosexual couples at bringing up an issue in a non-confrontational way, of listening when criticized. They were less defensive. They were more positive. John Gottman, the other thing we were able to do with our mathematical modeling was to find that not only do they start differently, but also the influence process in the married couple really moves them toward a more negative direction. The longer they talk to each other, the more angry they get, the more adversarial they tend to get. But in gay and lesbian couples, it's the opposite. The longer they talk about the issue, the closer they get and the more positive they become. So a very, very different process operating in the gay and lesbian couples we studied. Now if they're representative, then we heterosexuals have got a lot to learn from gay and lesbian relationships. Ira Glass, but John, the gay couples and the lesbian couples that you're talking about, they're simply as good as the very best couples in your heterosexual couples. Or you're saying they're even better than them. John Gottman, they're even better than them. Ira Glass, really? John Gottman, I mean, when you listen to the tapes, it's unbelievable what they're like. I'll give you an example of this. One gay man said to his partner, "What did you think about the sex this morning? Who do you think initiated the sex this morning?" And his partner said, "Well, you don't really have the kind of body on a man that I find really the most attractive." And the first man said, "I know that. But who do you think initiated sex this morning?" Quote, "Now can you imagine a husband?" Ira Glass, "Oh, my God." John Gottman, talking to his wife, right. Ira Glass, and saying, "You don't have the kind of body that I find attractive." John Gottman, "That's right. Can you imagine her saying, 'Yeah, I know that. But who do you think initiated sex?'" So there's so much less deception, so much more honesty, and so much more directness. And I don't know if it's representative. But I was very impressed. Ira Glass, Gottman still can't explain why the gay couples would be so different. He thinks part of the reason might be that, in general, it's just easier for men to talk to men and women to talk to women. The fact that they communicate so differently makes things harder in heterosexual couples. Their communication just doesn't improve over time. Being in my first real healthy relationship, I've realized that both people need to be committed to their individual and collective growth to create a fulfilling, healthy relationship. If one or both people aren't trying and make a habit of withholding the true thoughts and make no effort to make the small changes to eventually meet the other halfway, it's inevitable. I actually found a healthy relationship by just being myself and not pretending to be someone else. Sure, I don't go all gross with her, but I mean she knows pretty much everything about me and seems to accept it all. That also takes a lot of stress away from me because I can just be myself. And the same goes with her. I'm not going to details, but she's not always the Hollywood idea of classy lady, and that's okay, and I kind of have learned to love those things that she doesn't do so ladylike. None of us are perfect, and the sooner we accept it the better we're. And heck, I guess I did something right because she married me. This is my marriage as well. We've grown so comfortable with each other even in the grossest of times. I mean, when you think of a long term, you really have to think long term. Is this person going to help you possibly use restroom and wipe your butt or bathe, clean your dentures, all the above that is considered gross, but is all human normality? That's the person you want to be with. It's not about looks or sex. In the end, it's all about unconditional love, no matter. When one person really wants a threesome and the other person really doesn't want a threesome. God, the stories I've read on here about how the relationship isn't the same after having a threesome. I don't think I could ever do one, and thankfully my partner isn't into it either. Reddit made me have this conversation early on the relationship so I wouldn't have this problem after being together a while. It takes two of a very specific type of person to pull that off in a relationship. The overwhelming majority of people ain't that type. After I was married about 3 years, a coworker that had been married for a few months asked how long we lasted before we ran out of stuff to talk about. I figured that was bad sign. While I agree with that in general, I think it's part of any healthy relationship that you are comfortable in silence with each other. That's when I knew my, now, husband was the man I was going to marry. Spending hours together talking, but also sitting in silence while he plays games and I read. I'd never been able to be quiet with someone before. We never run out of things to talk about, and I never feel awkward just being with him if we are just existing together on the couch and not constantly speaking to one another. When they act as though they don't like or respect you. And when you point that out, they say you're being too sensitive. Fuck, this one is triggering for me. Read an article somewhere where responses to bids for attention are a huge indicator. Bidding and responding to bids are crucial to keeping things going. Some people poo-poo that as small talk, but the most successful pairs I've met talk about things that seem inconsequential all the time. One of the kids in my family, I remember this, was 14 or so and called up a girl, and the whole conversation was about favorite kinds of breakfast cereal. The pauses indicated to me that he was listening to her when she talked. BTW, I was not sitting there with my hand cupped around my ear. He was next to me on the sofa while I was having coffee with his mom. 30 years later, he's married to that cereal aficionado. What does this mean? Like, one tries to get the other's attention, and the other responds, and that's an unhealthy dynamic. Or like, one is trying to get the attention of others outside the relationship. If I'm scrolling an article and find something interesting, and mention it to my partner, that is a bid for attention. If he consistently ignores my bids for attention, it's an indicator that the relationship will not last. IDK if I explained it properly, lol. It's more like, for example, mentioning something that interests you to your partner, and them either outright ignoring it, not really engaging with you, or worse, acting annoyed that you shared something with them. It was an attempt to connect with your partner and they just shut you down. And yeah, sometimes people just don't have the bandwidth in that moment, and that's okay. It's more when it becomes a consistent pattern of micro-rejections. More reading if you're interested. https://www.gottman.com/blog/turn-toward-instead-of-away/. It means when you go, "Hey babe, come look at this bird." ! Quote. He comes over and goes, "Wow. Cool bird," even if he doesn't care for birds. When partners do this for each other, their relationships are more likely to last. When you say, "Hey babe, come look at this bird," and he ignores you or seems uninterested, these relationships are more likely to fail.